Drive past any big dealer group on the outskirts of town right now, and you'll see it before you even get out of the car. Rows of brand new metal, nose to tail, windscreens fogging up under grey British skies. None of them moving, not test-driven, not sold. Just sitting there, racking up storage fees while some poor sales manager tries to hit a monthly target that gets further away every week. This isn't a rumour. This is what's actually happening on forecourts up and down the country in 2026, and the numbers behind it are genuinely startling. According to figures compiled by UHY Hacker Young, the value of unsold stock sitting on UK dealer books has hit a record £27.3 billion. That's up 16% in a single year, 16% in 12 months, while household budgets are tighter than they've been in a generation. Car makers keep shipping vehicles to dealers whether the dealers want them or not, because factories don't stop for slow sales. And now those dealers are renting extra fields and industrial units just to have somewhere to park it all. Overspill sites you'd never even notice from the road, packed bumper to bumper with cars that were built to be driven, not stored. One line from the industry sums it up better than I ever could. It's unsustainable for unsold stock to keep rising this quickly. And here's the part that makes this whole situation so strange. This isn't happening because the overall market's dead. New passenger vehicle registrations in the first quarter of 2026 actually rose by 5.9%, hitting the highest March figures since 2019. People are still buying cars, plenty of cars in fact. Ford Puma, Kia Sportage, the usual suspects, they're moving off the lots just fine. So this isn't a story about British people falling out of love with driving, it's something narrower and in a way more interesting than that. It's a story about a handful of very specific categories where supply and what people actually want have come completely unstuck from each other, where manufacturers are building and shipping based on regulation targets and old assumptions, rather than what's actually parked on people's driveways. So today we're going to look at 5 specific types of car that are piling up hardest, why buyers are walking straight past them, and what it actually says about where this country's love affair with the motor car is heading in 2026. Let's start with the one that might surprise you the most, because on paper it should be flying out of the showroom, the budget electric hatchback. Cars in the mold of the MG4 and the Vauxhall Corsa electric. Cheap to buy compared with most EVs, decent range on paper, government incentives dangled in front of you, and yet they are sitting on forecourts from Kent to Kirkcaldy, gathering dust under tarpaulins. Here's the twist nobody saw coming a few years back. These cars are brilliant if you buy them used, and an absolute financial headache if you buy them new. The average MG4 in SE trim loses roughly 22.5% of its value in the first year alone. By year 2 you're down around 37.7%, which on a car that might have cost you 20-odd grand new, means you've watched close to £8,000 evaporate into thin air before you've even worn through a set of tyres. The Corsa electric isn't much kinder to your wallet, sliding down the depreciation curve at a rate that would make a diesel Discovery blush. Walk the used EV forums and you'll see the exact same conversation playing out over and over. Someone bought new 18 months ago, proud as anything, charging cable coiled neatly in the boot, and now they're staring at a trade-in valuation that makes their stomach drop. Owners describe it almost the same way every time, that sinking feeling when the finance settlement figure comes back higher than what the car's actually worth on the open market. It's not that the car's done anything wrong, the battery's fine, the motor's fine, the paint's fine. It's simply that used EV supply has been growing fast as leasing contracts and fleet cars come back onto the market through defleeting, dragging prices down across the board by something like 10% year on year, with average depreciation sitting between 38 and 42% after just 3 years. Dealers know this, finance companies know this, and increasingly so do buyers, which is exactly why so many of them are choosing to wait 18 months and pick one up nearly new for a fraction of the sticker price, instead of walking in fresh off the production line. There's a bigger story tangled up in this too, and it's one that manufacturers don't love talking about out loud. The government's zero-emission vehicle mandate requires a rising percentage of every manufacturer's sales to be fully electric. This year the target sits around 33%, but actual battery electric registrations have only been running at about 23.1% of the market. That's a serious gap. So what do the car makers do to close it without paying enormous compliance fines? They discount these entry-level EVs aggressively. They push them onto dealer forecourts in bigger numbers than there is genuine demand for, and they lean on the electric car grant scheme, worth up to £3,750 off selected new EVs, just to get the numbers moving in the right direction on a spreadsheet in Vauxhall. The result is a flood of small electric hatchbacks, sitting on lots that exist less because British drivers are queuing up for them, and more because the maths of a government mandate demanded they be built. Honestly, if you're in the market for one of these, you're in a stronger position than you've ever been. Just don't expect the dealer to be smiling when you walk in asking for a discount, because they've already got 40 more just like it parked round the back. Now let's talk about the car that used to be the backbone of the school run and the motorway commute. The mid-size diesel family car and diesel SUV. Diesel registrations across the UK fell by 12.5% in the most recent reporting period, a number that keeps sliding year after year, and yet dealer stock hasn't shrunk to match. Manufacturers built their production plans around volumes that simply don't exist anymore. So what were once the best-selling body styles in the country, your diesel Qashqais, your diesel Sportages, your big diesel estates built for towing caravans up to the Lake District, are now sitting there with genuine bargain stickers slapped across the windscreen. There's a real irony here too. These are, in many cases, genuinely excellent cars. Reliable engines, low running costs if you actually do the miles, plenty of torque for towing, the kind of car that'll happily rack up 150,000 miles on the motorway network without so much as a hiccup. But the narrative around diesel in this country has shifted so hard, thanks to clean air zones creeping into more and more city centres, thanks to the drumbeat of headlines about emissions scandals that never quite faded, that ordinary buyers now associate the word diesel with guilt rather than value. Spend any time reading the comments under one of those forecourt walk-around videos and you'll notice a pattern. Half the audience is convinced diesel is basically finished, dead and buried, not worth touching. The other half, usually the ones who actually tow a caravan up to the Lake District every summer, or rack up huge motorway miles for work, are quick to jump in and point out that a well-maintained diesel is still, mile for mile, the cheapest way to cover serious distance in this country. Both of them are sort of right, and that split opinion is exactly why the segment's stuck in limbo. Ask around any dealer group in the Midlands and you'll hear the same thing. Stock that used to sell in 3 weeks is now sitting on the lot for 3 months. And every extra week it sits there, it's quietly losing value, which means the discounts keep getting deeper, which means the whole segment is now something of a race to the bottom that nobody in the industry particularly wanted to run. Walk the rows on a wet Tuesday afternoon and you can practically feel it, that faint smell of diesel and rain on tarmac, windscreens speckled with the first bit of road grime, roof racks still wrapped in plastic because nobody's even sat in them yet. Here's a name that's going to sting a little if you've got one on your driveway right now, or if your nan swears by hers. Fiat. The Italian brand's registrations in the UK collapsed by roughly 60% in the first quarter of 2026 alone. 60%. That's not a dip, that's closer to a cliff edge. Walk onto a Fiat forecourt in 2026 and you'll find rows of 500s and Pandas, cars that were once the darling of city centre parking and supermarket runs, now sitting there in colours nobody's buying, waiting for buyers who increasingly aren't coming through the door at all. Some of this is a straightforward product problem. The range has aged. Competition in the small car segment from Korean and Chinese brands has become genuinely brutal on both price and equipment, with new arrivals offering longer warranties, sharper infotainment, and frankly nicer cabins for similar money. But some of it is something harder to fix with a spec sheet. It's confidence. Once a brand starts sliding this fast in the sales charts, buyers start to worry about resale value, about dealer network support down the line, about whether spare parts will still be easy to get in 5 years, about whether there'll even be a Fiat dealer left in their county by the time the warranty runs out. That worry becomes self-fulfilling. Fewer people buy, which means fewer dealers stock the brand properly, which means even less confidence, and round it goes. Ask a long-time Fiat 500 owner online what keeps them loyal, and you'll get the same answer nearly every time. It's the character, the way it parks in a gap nothing else fits into, the way it still turns heads outside the school gates even on its 10th birthday. That emotional loyalty hasn't gone anywhere. What's changed is that fewer new buyers are willing to bet on the brand's future when there are so many newer, cheaper, better equipped alternatives sitting right next to it on the same forecourt. For the person willing to ignore all that noise though, there's an obvious opportunity sitting on those lots right now, because a dealer desperate to clear space on a car that's been sat there since spring will do a deal that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. Then there's Seat, another brand that's been quietly bleeding registrations, down around 30% this year. You'll find Ibizas and Atecas parked up in numbers that don't match what's actually rolling out the door, and the reason is a mix of internal politics and market pressure. Seat's own parent company has been pouring more and more marketing energy and product development into the Cupra badge instead, which is effectively cannibalizing Seat's own lineup from within. Why would a dealer push hard on selling you a Seat Ateca when there's a sportier, more premium-feeling Cupra sat 2 spaces down on the same forecourt, wearing a badge that photographs better on Instagram and carries a healthier profit margin for everyone in the chain? It's a strange thing to watch happen to a brand that, not that long ago, had genuine cult status among younger drivers looking for something a bit sharper to drive than the usual Golf or Focus. Seat built its whole identity on being the Spanish cousin, with more attitude, sportier suspension, a bit of flair in the styling. Now walk onto a forecourt and the salesperson practically steers you toward the Cupra badge before you've even finished your sentence, because that's where the margin is and that's where head office wants the volume. Seats becoming the middle child nobody's fighting over anymore, stuck between VW's mainstream reliability on one side and Cupra's flashier image on the other, and dealer forecourts up and down the country are the physical evidence of that identity crisis playing out in real time, one unsold Ibiza at a time. Finally, and this one genuinely surprised even people inside the trade, premium and near-luxury SUVs from German manufacturers are starting to stack up too. Porsche's UK registrations were down around 16% in the first quarter, and while a Porsche dealership isn't exactly a struggling operation by any measure, the fact that even that end of the market is feeling a chill tells you something important about where consumer confidence sits in this country right now. When the squeeze on household budgets reaches all the way up into six-figure SUV territory, when even people who could comfortably afford the monthly payments are choosing to hold off, delay the upgrade, keep the old one running one more year, that's not a small signal. That's a genuine shift in mood. You can see it in the showroom body language if you spend a Saturday afternoon watching. Fewer families wandering in just to have a look and dream a little. Fewer trade-in conversations. The people who do walk through the door are more cautious, asking harder questions about running costs, about MOT history on the demonstrator, about whether now's really the right time. Dealers who once had waiting lists for certain premium SUV models are now sitting on pre-registered examples, sometimes barely a few hundred miles on the clock, discounted thousands of pounds below list price just to book the sale before the end of the quarter and keep the numbers looking respectable for head office. It's an odd sensation for anyone who remembers the years when getting your hands on a new Porsche Cayenne meant putting your name down and waiting patiently. Now the wait's gone, replaced by a salesperson who's suddenly very keen to talk numbers the moment you show the faintest hint of interest. So what ties all five of these together? It's not that any of these cars are bad. Genuinely, most of them are good cars, well-engineered, competent, in some cases excellent value once the discounts kick in properly. What's happened is that the entire British car market has been squeezed from two directions at once. On one side, you've got the ZEV mandate forcing manufacturers to build and push electric cars faster than genuine demand can absorb them. On the other side, you've got household budgets tightened by years of inflation, higher interest rates, and general economic caution, making every single buyer, whether they're choosing between a Fiat 500 or a Porsche Cayenne, that little bit more hesitant to sign on the dotted line. Add in the lingering confusion around diesel, the identity crisis eating away at mid-tier brands like Seat, and the sheer volume of stock manufacturers keeps sending down the pipeline, regardless of what dealers are actually asking for, and you end up with exactly what we're seeing. Full lots, deep discounts, and a car industry that's quietly, nervously, trying to figure out how to sell people cars they actually want to buy again. Consultants working with dealer groups have started using a phrase that sums up the mood inside head office meetings right now, warning that unsold stock simply cannot keep climbing at this rate indefinitely, because eventually something has to give. Either manufacturers slow down production to match real demand, which costs jobs and dents factory output figures they don't want to admit to shareholders, or dealers keep discounting harder and harder until margins disappear entirely and smaller independent dealer groups start going under, something that's already been happening quietly in pockets of the country over the past year. There's a generational angle to all this too, one that doesn't get talked about enough. Younger buyers, the ones just passing their test and looking at their first car, increasingly aren't thinking about ownership the way their parents did. Subscription models, short-term leases, car clubs in city centres, all of that chips away at the traditional idea of walking onto a forecourt and driving away with something you own outright for the next decade. That shift alone changes what kind of stock actually makes sense for a dealer to hold, and it's part of why so many of these full lots feel less like a temporary blip and more like the industry slowly realizing the old playbook doesn't quite work anymore. There's actually a genuinely useful lesson buried in all of this, if you're the sort of person who's thinking about buying rather than just watching from the sidelines. When stock piles up this badly, the power in the room shifts. It stops being about what the dealer's willing to accept and starts being about how desperate they are to see a particular car drive off the lot before the end of the month. Salespeople who'd have laughed you out of the showroom 2 years ago for asking for an extra few £100s off are now the ones bringing the finance manager over before you've even asked. Every one of these 5 categories, the budget EVs, the diesel family cars, the Fiats, the Seats, even the premium German SUVs, represents leverage sitting there waiting for anyone patient enough to use it. If you've noticed one of these sitting untouched at your local dealer for months on end, you're not imagining it, and honestly, you might be looking at the best negotiating position British car buyers have had in years. Drop a comment and tell me which one of these 5 you've spotted piling up nearest to you, whether you've owned one of them yourself, or whether you reckon there's a 6th car that deserves a spot on this list. And if you want to keep seeing exactly what's really happening on Britain's forecourts before the headlines catch up, you know what to do. Hit subscribe, because this story is only just getting started.